How do you improve the lives of South Africans when there are so few jobs or prospects, or when key departments have had to deliver more services with less money? Well, President Cyril Ramaphosa has his job cut out for him as the nation looks to him for answers tonight. Dr. Jason Musyoka is at the Development Economist, and he's going to discuss some of the pressing issues and how we can make real progress. Prof, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, the real issue here is expanding social support and really just the economic recovery of the country amidst the absolute hollowing out of state structures and infighting within not just the ruling party but the executive too.
So thank you so much, Annika. Yes, I think what we expect firstly to hear the president talk about is the recovery process. That is a theme that has been on his State of the Nation really since 2019, 2020, and of course 2021. And we expect the economic recovery theme to still feature in his State of the Nation. And not least because in 2020, the government put together the Economic Recovery and Reconstruction Plan, which looks at three key issues. The first was, of course, the immediate response to COVID-19, which was very necessary, I think. The second one was on to try and deal with the question of reform. And of course, the third one was largely to deal with the economic recovery, not just responding to COVID-19. So we do expect, unfortunately, the president to lay out the current figures of unemployment, Annika, which in 2021, he mentioned in the State of the Nation, we were sitting at 30.8% of unemployment. As it stands now, he will have, unfortunately, to report to the nation that the numbers went the opposite direction of what the government was thinking, which we are sitting at 34.9%, which is really the highest this country has ever had since at least 1994. So that's the issue we are grappling with, and we hope to hear a little bit more about what do we do with this runaway unemployment. The reforms and the interventions that the government has made have not really borne fruit just yet. So where we go to from here, we'd like to hear some proposals from him.
Let's talk about the basic income grant. It's a topic that is on everyone's lips. Do we have the money and the courage to implement it?
There is a political division at the moment. The Presidential Commission were divided. Some leaked information suggested that there is a division among the advisors themselves on where we go with basic income grant. But perhaps to take a step back, the president has been very adamant that basic income grant is the way to go. Now, I have to indicate here that if you look at countries such as ours, like Brazil, which also battle with high levels of unemployment and inequality, and they have successfully been able to implement the basic income grant. But of course, it has to be progressive, and it's usually a long-term game that is planned. Now, in South Africa, what we are dealing with now is the fact that we are trying to scramble to respond to a crisis of COVID-19, which of course has created very high levels of unemployment with a basic income grant, which we don't have the money for. So we are dealing with two major expenditures here. One is to deal with COVID-19 health crisis and the related economic issues. And then we want to commit to upwards of 40 billion rand every year towards basic income grant. And I think that's where the real debate is. Can we really afford? So the question at the moment, in my view, is that we cannot afford a basic income grant. Perhaps we can stagger that, or we can sequence interventions so that we aim for basic income grant implementation about a decade or so to come, but we cannot afford at the moment. We are sitting at about 70% of GDP, a debt to GDP ratio at the moment. So we are really in a bad fiscal moment. But I suppose that the president might still need to keep the basic income grant debate on the table, but I do not think that we can afford it at the moment.
I mean, he's also coming up for conference at the end of the year, and it's certainly something that's a big topic of discussion. When one looks at the fiscus and the actual pie, how much is 40 billion really to part with per year?
So we are looking at upwards of 20%. And I think with where we are now, we're going to deal, keeping in mind that there are still recommendations that we need to deal not just with the basic income grant, but we also need to deal with health insurance. And the health insurance is also supposedly going largely to be covered by the state. This is outside of our usual social expenditure on education and other aspects of social spending. So if you look at all of that, adding what we already have, the high debt, to, or adding another 20% of GDP, we don't have that money anywhere at the moment. We'll have to borrow to fund the basic income grant. And at the moment now, as you know, we borrowed a couple of billions from the IMF, and that's going to be paid over a long period of time. So we already are dealing with, and that was not intended at dealing with unemployment in any direct way. This was to try and still deal with the COVID-19 crisis of health. So this gets to show you just how vulnerable the fiscus is at the moment. So to try and commit taxpayers again to, or perhaps even the government, to borrow more money, which we will have to pay interest for, is going to stifle growth in a significant way. One of the most effective ways of implementing basic income grant is really to try and ensure that we have sufficient growth, and you generate revenue from growth to fund social expenditure such as basic income grant. But we are not there yet.
Thank you so much. That was Dr. Jason Musyoka, Development Economist at the University of Pretoria. And just bear in mind that this year has had the highest loss of life in South Africa since the height of the HIV pandemic, AIDS pandemic. So it's been a very rough year for the president, and he's really going to have to manage that fiscus very carefully ahead of the budget speech, which will be later on in the year.